All right. Well, welcome to yet another episode of Fuck You Friday. I'm your host, Win Silverman. This is my co-host, Casey LeBlanc. And I'm very excited today because we have a special guest in town. His name is Joe Tsai. Joe, thank you very much for coming and participating on our podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Joseph Tsai here is a senior executive for Harvest, which is extremely elite cannabis company, one of the most elite cannabis companies, quite frankly, in the world. And we're really excited to be able to dig in a little bit about that and the business side of things. It's obviously you're a true pioneer in an industry, and it's awesome. But Joe, what I like to do before we start getting into you is always have Casey just kind of explain why we're here, because you still don't really know, and I don't know, and maybe if you could help me, Casey.
That would be wonderful, because you've done this a few times.
Yeah, give me some context. I still don't know why I'm here.
Well, I can tell you a little bit about the podcast. I don't really know why we're here, but I think
or why he's here in general.
So I think just generally speaking, Fuck You Friday is about how you're competing on Fridays to set yourself up for success. So what people are doing that most people wouldn't. So most people, it's kind of like Friday's the third day of the weekend, and you get into this mentality of like, how do I just survive? And, in the business world, in the realm that we want to talk with you about, it's a lot about how are people competing in business to be successful. And Friday being a day where, like, when I first moved to San Diego, it's a beach town, right? Like, nobody's working past 12 o'clock. And so we're talking to business executives that have shown ultra success, athletes that have been at the top of their game. And we want to know, what are little things, tips, tricks, that you may or may not even recognize that you're doing that other people can learn some things from. So that's kind of the genesis of it. And usually what we do at this point is kind of just start with some of your background, kind of where you're from, and give us a little bit of background as far as how you got to be where you're at today.
Sure. Grew up in California.
Okay.
So fortunately, which at the time I didn't love, but I grew up on a farm. Grew up with horses, cows, pigs, and all my friends lived in the city, got to run around and play. Instead, for me, I was waking up at 5 a.m. before I went to school, feeding animals, digging trenches, doing all the things that you would do on a farm. So I grew up in Modesto. Which I'm sure you know where Modesto is.
Yeah.
Central Valley there, big farm area. From there, moved to...
And you just staying on that note, so you probably learned a lot, like work ethic wise, right from the get-go, right? Farming, and then when you say digging trenches, that's how I grew up, so that resonates with me, right? So you almost learn more doing that than you do in school. Can you talk a little bit about, we just jump right in there.
Yeah, 100%. Look, I grew up middle class. I've been very fortunate in my life. And if I look back on everything that's happened to me in my life, it starts with the work ethic that my father and mother, instilled in me when I was on the farm. I wasn't given, a Corvette when I turned 16. I wasn't, we weren't poor, but we didn't have a lot of money. I never wanted for anything. But what I did get, and very fortunate, I have two parents that are still married 55 years. They raised three great kids. Well, at least two great kids, and then there's me. So we'll figure that out.
So they had at least one black sheep on your farm, right?
Of course, absolutely. I was definitely the one that was in trouble on a regular basis. My father's a Naval Academy graduate, so I also had that military. He's got that military background. Still wears a crew cut. And so it's very black and white the way I grew up. And
so was your when you were a kid, is everything outlined like, hey, you're going to wake up at 5 o'clock, and then from 5 to 6 you're doing this? Were you on military timelines?
To some extent.
Okay.
Right, like you had to get everything done before you went to school, and you had to do everything when you got home. From school, I can still remember my father telling me and my brother, we're moving to a farm because you boys are going to learn how to work. And I didn't love it through the age of 14, right? My friends are off at, doing whatever they're doing, out riding their bikes, skateboarding, and I'm out there, like we said, digging trenches. But when I look back on my life and where I'm at today, that's why I'm where I'm at,
That's
right?
awesome.
Because you have to be willing to do what other people aren't willing to do. And you talk about Fridays, right? How many people block their calendars on Friday?
Right.
To me, every day is Monday when it comes to business.
Right.
So I'm 24/7. I'm on, phones on. All the people that work for me, I'm available for. Always trying to find an edge. Right?
Well, so in a backstory, you and I met in Arizona, and it was Sunday, right? And me and Win were on vacation. When we were on vacation,
He was on vacation.
Well, yeah,
you came for a few days.
I came for well, his vacation was a lot longer than mine. His vacation has been since high school.
Yeah, or before that. I was thinking fourth grade.
But it was Sunday, and it was interesting. Like we sat down to brunch, and we're thinking, okay, like it's party time, right? Because we're on vacation, and you were like, absolutely not. Like Sunday's a day I'm preparing. You go, you don't understand. Like the people that report to me, I have a responsibility to them, and I thought it was an interesting point. Is like as a leader, when you're thinking like that, it comes from like a lineage of people that have done similar things. So your father being in the military and kind of ingraining this work ethic in you, but it's also now morphed into some leadership and making choices.
Yeah,
right?
Leadership, and you're not only a leader, but there's a pioneer component to this. Let's transition into cannabis because it's one of the first industries where it's a nascent industry. Number one. Number two, I would assume. I mean, how your father reacted to you sharing that you were going to get in this industry. When exactly did you decide that you wanted to get into this industry, and what were some of the reasons why?
Sure. 2013, I would say, is when I knew I wanted to get into the cannabis industry. Maybe 2011, maybe even. But it was the Wild West here in California, as you know. I was running a telecommunications business in 2013. Acquired a business in Arizona. When I got to Arizona, that happened to be the first real regulated market in cannabis. And it became evident to me, well, in 2011, I knew, you're talking about a new industry, you're building something, the opportunity there, right, to take something from nothing to where Harvest is today is there's so much opportunity. So for me, I knew wanting to be in that industry, not because it's marijuana, because I'm not really a marijuana guy, but for me, it was all about business, and it was all about the opportunity. It was about the ability to build something in an industry that was brand new, right, fragmented, and just that's what excited me. But it took me till July of 2017 to find the right group.
Can you, for those that don't know, can you talk about Harvest, like what it is, and just give us like the kind of the elevator pitch of exactly what Harvest is and how it's different, and then some background on size and scale of what you've done since whether it was 13 or 17 and where it is today.
Sure. So Harvest is a multi-state operator. We're one of the biggest in the country. And we just actually inked a merger and are in the process of closing that merger, which will make the combined companies the largest or most profitable cannabis company in the world. And we sold Harvest for $2.1 billion, and that transaction should close hopefully this year. But it could take a year from now. It's all regulatory stuff, as when you're familiar with, right? Yeah. So ownership changes, license, changing people out on licenses, et cetera. So we started out in Arizona. Our CEO, Steve White, started the company, and in July of 17, I came in as an investor with another partner, Jason Vidati, merged some licenses into Harvest, and at that point, Harvest had 7 licenses, I believe. By sometime early 19, we had almost 200 licenses across the country.
Wow.
So walk me through, in terms of licensing, there's obviously there's every state kind of treats things a little differently, right? But for California, for example, there's various things you could get into in the context of this industry. You can get into manufacturing, you can get into distribution, you can get into retail, you can cultivation, everything, right? But what did you choose a specific category, for example, for California or any state, or is there something that you're driven towards, for example? Are you more driven towards retail versus cultivation, and why?
I think verticality is important, right? So being vertical, that's where you see your biggest margins, right? So it's difficult to just be a retailer in this industry.
Define verticality in the context of this industry. What does that mean?
So starting your supply chain starts in your cultivation facility, growing your own product, taking your own product to market, so finished good in packaged flower, also taking the byproduct of that trim and adulterated material, which would be flower that you can't sell, taking that into the manufacturing facility, pressing that into oil, making vape pens, edibles, etc. So your cultivation, manufacturing, you're really running about 5 businesses when you're vertical. Generally, I like to say, I have friends that is a beer distributor, right? They're a beer distributor. That's what they do. At Harvest, we are big ag, manufacturer, distributor. We're a retailer, right? And you could throw a few other businesses in there. So being vertical is a challenge. It's something that you don't normally see in most industries here.
And are you even allowed to do it?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. In California, you can be vertical. One company can own all types of licenses, except you cannot also. So you can't be a cultivator and you can't be have a testing license, right? So that testing license has to be separate. But everything else you can own under one company in the state of California. Some states like Florida, you're forced to be vertical. So there are no horizontal licenses in the state of Florida. So Arizona forced to be vertical. Now you don't have to be vertical in Arizona because you can buy third-party product. In Florida, you cannot. You must produce everything you sell in your stores. Well, so it's different by state.
Yeah, it's interesting too. And then there's also this component of like the federal acceptance of your business, right? Yeah. So can you, as an executive, walk us through what it's like working in an industry where it's state, every state is kind of on its own, and then the federal government, it's kind of, they're almost doing like a look away. Like we know what's going on, but we're not willing to really do anything about it. What's your take on some of that? It's kind of a hot topic, obviously, in the industry.
Sure. If we talk about federal legalization, I don't think we're going to see that anytime soon.
Really?
No, I don't. You may see, hopefully Congress will do some things to help the industry to advance. And when I talk about advance, I think one of the most important things is banking. So we're very fortunate. We have banking in every state that we operate in, but it's very difficult. So having to be, basically each state, it's almost like we run an international business, I guess would be the best way to describe that, because in each state, you have a different set of rules. You have to build your infrastructure, can't build cross state lines, right? So I can't cultivate flower in Arizona and sell it across the country. I have to cultivate in every state.
Because of the federal issue. That's
Absolutely.
Federal jurisdiction. So when you have two states involved and you're doing business in that state, the federal government comes in and says, hey, look, because of the Commerce Clause, we have jurisdiction and it's our rules now, and so you can't do that.
Well, I can't. Yeah, interstate commerce would be a really bad thing for any publicly traded organization like Harvest to have an issue with. So all of us have to build the infrastructure, each individual state, right? So you lose the efficiency in the scalability of your business, right? Because otherwise we'd have a giant cultivation in California and we'd be shipping flower across the country, right? And then the rules, so every state, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Arizona, we all have different rules. So you're really managing a separate business.
Do you have like a compliance director? Or is that just kind of the executives are all kind of managing that?
Well, so everybody's responsible for compliance, but I do have a legal team of seven or so folks, and compliance is always at the top of our list, absolutely. But it's the responsibility of everybody in the organization.
And you talked a little bit. Sorry, talked a little bit about going public. I'm assuming that going public is not in the USA, right?
No.
Right. Okay,
Unfortunately, it's not. It's very interesting. So, all the Canadian marijuana companies trade here in the U.S. on the U.S. stock exchange, and that's part of the banking thing that I'm talking about. If we come back to that, right? And then all the big U.S. companies, which were a much larger market, we trade on a much smaller stock exchange, on the Canadian Securities Exchange in Canada, because it's federally legal in Canada and it's federally illegal in Arizona. So because it's federally legal in Canada, they can trade in Canada. The Canadians can trade here, Canadian companies, and because it's federally legal in Canada, we can trade on their shares.
So were you part of the exec team that was able to, do they ring the bell? Is it similar to the New York Stock Exchange?
Yeah, walk us through that. What happened?
No, it wasn't quite like that.
Oh, it wasn't? Okay.
It's a tough process to get public. A lot easier, I believe, though, in Canada than it would have been here in the U.S. But it was, at the time, the right decision for the organization. I'd much rather be a private company, by the way. It's very difficult to be a publicly
Why
traded
did you go public? What was the concept?
Because you needed a couple things. One of them, raising capital at that time was still difficult to do in the industry. Much easier to go public in Canada to raise capital. And then to use your stock as currency for acquisitions. So those were the two main reasons why you decide to go public in our industry. And at that time, it was a land grab, right? You needed to be able to access capital, and you needed to be able to acquire licenses
quickly, right?
Yeah, because if you take states like Illinois, you get a limited license. Arizona, limited license, right? Most all the states we're in are limited license states. So if you don't have a license, you're out.
I'm curious on looking out into the future and where tobacco plays a role, right? These are these massive companies that are
absolutely
right. They're just kind of sitting in the background, and
what are they waiting on?
What can you maybe hypothesize on where you see tobacco playing a role in cannabis moving forward?
Sure. I mean, I think if you look at, you can look at several different industries, right? Alcohol is going to have a role. Tobacco will have a role. Even Circle K may have a role, right? Because you're going to look at the business that we have. If we were actually to sell this business to somebody outside the industry, most likely you would chop it up, right? So you would probably have Big Ag come in and buy your cultivation facilities. I said Circle K. I mean, you could look at 7-Eleven. Any of these groups may come in and want to buy the retails, right? I think they all have a role, but the reason that they can't be involved in the industry today is because of the federal legalization. If we could get something passed in Washington that would at least allow us to trade on the U.S. Stock Exchange, access private equity money here in the United States, that would really make a big difference and allow those groups to enter to the market.
You guys can't have private equity?
It's really difficult in the U.S.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, depending on the company, right? Depending on
It's interesting because I mean, we need to go into unions that much, but from a labor context, I mean, Richard Trumka has spoken to some extent and said, "Hey, look, even labor has blessed this industry. They gave a 3-year gift to the food workers. Obviously, as we know, I mean, the unions are trying to get involved. I don't want to go too heavy into that, but it's interesting that there's federal movement, right? I mean, that's labor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's all kinds of groups, but I think the union is one. They're really pushing, right, because they're losing membership in other areas.
Yeah,
right?
they're seeing this
so
as an opportunity.
They're really pushing and seeing this as an opportunity to say, okay, this is where we can go and grow, and cannabis is a space that is growing rapidly, right? Even today, where you have, it is difficult to hire hourly employees. Yeah. In cannabis, we might have 1,000 people apply for 10 positions in a dispensary. And so that's where, union, but there's a lot of other areas, even federally chartered banks are doing business to some extent with some of the
They're finding something, there's some wiggle room in their charter somehow,
sure.
right?
And so it's really, is Congress going to actually get off their butts and say, okay, the cat's way out of the bag. Nothing's going to change here, right? It's only going to continue to move forward. It would definitely help not just the industry, but it would help if they would pass something to at least allow banking.
So we're going to wait on government. No wonder you're not real optimistic on the future.
Yeah, right.
So okay, so speaking of the future, I'm always interested in, and I know maybe you probably can't talk about specifics, but someone who knows that the business, the industry is hyper growth over the long haul, right? If we're not of retirement age and we want to invest in the business itself, are there certain areas that we should be looking at into the future that would be more opportunistic as a long play? Because it's interesting. Like I like gambling stocks, and I like to get into the industry that's kind of on the ground level for where I am in my age in my life. And like I look at gambling and I look at cannabis as interesting plays because there's it's the same thing, right? It's not federally accepted.
And potentially recession-proof plays. I mean, in a sense, potentially.
I mean, listen, our sales went up during COVID, big
right?
Time. But if you want to talk about an opportunity, right? This is still an industry that's in its infancy,
right? Exactly.
Right. It's not federally legal yet. We trade. If you look at any of the major MSOs today, it's great opportunity because.
When you say MSO, what does that mean?
Multi-state operator.
Okay.
So we would be considered a multi-state operator. We operate in multiple states across the country. So if you look at the big 5, 6, 7 groups out there, we've been dubbed MSOs, right?
And that's all there is. There's 5 or 7 of them right now.
No, I mean there's more coming.
Okay.
But yeah, there's really still maybe 7 groups that were started out as this is our plan. We're going to go out and we're going to build across the country.
One of the reasons, go up. I
was going to say, I think the big opportunity here from a investment standpoint is when there is some change somewhere in the banking area that allows us to trade on a New York Stock Exchange, right? Because at that point, the liquidity of the stock market is going to make a huge difference in the stock prices, right, and the ability for people to bring more money. And then it's going to bring in the groups we're talking about, right, big tobacco, alcohol. I mean, listen, we've all done a great job and I'm proud of all the MSOs out here that have been able to get to the point where they're at. But I can tell you right now, when Budweiser comes into this industry, they're going to do a little more efficient job than we are, right? They're going to be able to produce things cheaper than we are. So there's a big opportunity there in the future.
Can you invest in MSOs right now?
Absolutely.
Okay, so you would do it where you and how do you do that?
So we're all publicly traded in Canada. So you can either on the Canadian Securities Exchange or on the over-counter OTC here, the over-counter exchange here in the U.S. So they broker those Canadian stocks.
And so when it does become federally legal, how do you actually exchange on the New York Stock Exchange? That is another application where you
absolutely.
Okay, so
and we've had discussions already.
Okay.
At one point, and so a lot of us are already preparing for that, right? So we're getting GAP compliant because it's something that you have to do to trade here in the U.S. We're getting SOX compliant. So all the things that a company would need to do in order to trade on the U.S. Stock Exchange, all of us, MSOs, bigger MSOs, we're all preparing for that now.
Got it.
Walk me through just grabbing a license. Like let's use California first, and maybe another state after. But what is let's say you want to open up a cannabis shop in San Francisco, right? What exactly do you do? How long does it take? Give me a sense.
Well, that's really a question that I can't even answer because it really depends, right? So every state, municipalities to some extent, depending on what state you're in, it's different, right? So if I want a license in Arizona, I got to acquire one because there are no more licenses available to me.
The local government decides there's only X amount of licenses that will issue?
Sure.
Okay.
So the state of Arizona and what was passed in Arizona is that there's X amount of licenses, and that's how many there are.
It's just interesting. Sorry to interrupt, but is it like who knows who that gets those licenses? I mean, is it?
Oh, no. So actually in Arizona, and we'll get into the differences, right?
Yeah.
So in Arizona, everybody puts in an application, and then you're a lottery ball after that.
But are there backdoor deals going on? None of it. Everything is above
because
board.
They're pulling lottery balls. So
They're literally doing it.
Yeah. So there's a lottery ball, and if your ball comes out, so there are ways that you could position yourself better.
Okay.
But that's fine in the areas where other people may not be applying.
And
right?
by positioning yourself, do you have like 14 different balls in the thing?
Possibly, right? So at certain points, right, we have locked up, 10 different locations and put in 10 different applications for one license, right?
Got it.
Where somebody else may just be putting in one. Or maybe there's an area over here in the state where you find it's very hard to find real estate, but we've been able to find some real estate. And so there's maybe only 2 balls instead of 10 balls in that certain section on what they call in Arizona CHAWS. If you go to Florida, right, that was a application process, all on merit. If you go to Maryland, all on merit, right? So
yeah, stop real quick. The distinction, so merit-based versus non-merit-based.
Sure.
Dig into that a little bit because I'm sure people want to know.
Sure. So merit-based was where we're writing applications, and those applications are scored. And then the people who have the top scores end up with the licenses. And if they're given 5 licenses, like they gave 5 cultivation licenses in the state of Arkansas, we were in the top 5. And again, did we stack it for ourselves? Yeah, because we applied in every region for a cultivation license. We won in every region but one of them, and then we get to choose what region we wanted to go into, right? Where some people may have only applied in one region.
Well, you can use your size as a strength, right? Like you have
absolutely.
Your bank account has some merit to it.
I think what has more merit is operating the longest in the highly regulated medical market. Right. So Arizona, fortunately for Harvest, starting in Arizona and having that merit as we continue to go on. Not to mention our application team is the best in the country.
Got it.
But that merit really helped us when we started out winning licenses.
Do you feel like there's certain points in the application that you really try to be strong in that really can get you over the hump? Or
I don't. So really, you have to look at every state. You have to look at the application. You have to take the application apart and understand, okay, what really makes sense. So, for example, in the state of Maryland, we partnered with a small town called town of Hancock. They own 5% of what we have in Maryland. The reason we partnered with them is because it was a town that was on a downturn and it was struggling. And so in the application, we figured with how the application was, questions that were being asked, that by doing this and partnering with this town, that would get us, above other folks, and it did.
Well,
it's all state driven. Application driven.
I'm gonna pivot here a little bit because we could just start talking about it. Once Wynn starts asking about application process,
right, it's getting deep. I don't know. Everybody cares about this.
Right? I think people want to know how to win a license, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, we could come back to anything, but to loosen it up a little bit.
Okay.
Crying out loud. When you start asking like, hey, how do I just fill out an application? Well, you write your name down and then.
Yeah.
All right. So
are you trying to get me to put
an
application?
Yeah. I just wanted to know your recipe.
So Joe, to mix it up a little bit, let's talk about you as the person, right? Now you're an executive of a very successful company. So I want to know, what's it like having a couple of dollars in your pocket, married, kids, single, where do you live? Give us a little background on the person.
Okay.
And then we're going to go from
there. Not married, no kids.
Congratulations.
Yes. I think at the end of the day, I'm where I want to be. And I mean, if we really look back, I mean, to get a little personal, when I graduated college, I'm sitting exactly where I wanted to be when I graduated college. I expected myself to build, turn around, and hopefully take a company public at one point in my career. And I would say at the beginning of 2018, I had built and sold some private companies, but I had yet to get involved in any publicly traded companies. Now that I have, I wish I hadn't. But at the end of the day, it's
good lesson. Yeah,
it was being part of taking Harvest public was kind of the last checkbox for me from what I expected when I graduated college.
So let's kind of dive into that a little bit, because this is really the crux of what we're doing here at this podcast is understanding when you've checked all the boxes, right? And you look back on your career, can you give us a couple of things where you're like, these were pivotal moments or things I overcome or skills that they transcended my career, my life, and here I am looking back. Is there some can you glean some light on some of that for what people could learn from your experience?
Sure. I mean, again, I'll take it back to what starts, it starts on the farm. My father and mother, how I was raised, right? I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't given a Ferrari or those types of things, but what I was given is love. I was taught how to respect people, respect myself, and that, if I worked hard, that I would be able to achieve. Right?
Awesome.
So I worked hard in sports. I worked hard in school. And so those were life lessons that really put me in a position to where I'm at today, which is the number one thing I guess I would say for people is that I failed so many times. And there's so many times I looked at myself in the mirror and said, hey, you should go to work for IBM and make $500,000 a year. And, and I never quit. And so so they're not quitting and learning from all those, what I will call setbacks. People want to say failures. I'd like to retract that word, all the setbacks, because the only time I would have ever failed if I would have quit.
Right.
It's interesting.
Awesome.
We talk about you being single, right?
Yep.
And we've talked about this on a personal level, which is, I always thought, a very interesting perspective that you shared with me. I don't know if you remember this. It might have been a couple shots deep, but I'm not sure. It was interesting though, because you mentioned that. You mentioned how many times you failed, and one of the reasons that you shared with me as to why you were single at that moment was, because of the risks I take, business-wise, I feel like I have a responsibility to remain single, because I know what kind of risk assessment I have, and I don't want to put that on a family environment.
That's interesting.
It is interesting, and now though, interestingly, does that really play out right now? Because you've ostensibly you're financially secure. Does that change any concept of being single versus wanting to have a family, or no?
Well, I mean, I know I look like I'm 25, but I'm almost 50. And so I'm not sure I want any kids running around my house when I'm 75 years old.
I might break a hip.
Yeah, no, I would say that, what's cost me relationships in my life is the fact that the first time I ever had an employee, you don't really understand the responsibility, and Casey, I mean, until you have somebody who is dependent on you to make sure they have a paycheck every 2 weeks, to make sure they have health insurance, a safe place to work, right?
And when you own a business, you take that as your family, right? You 100%. Have a responsibility where I look at people that work with me, and I look at beyond just the person. I look at their family, their situation, 100%. And I wake up every morning with this like opportunity to help people come up and do things that they never thought possible, but also with the responsibility of like one employee equals two, you start to grow and scale. You start doing the math on people with, 4 kids and things like that. It's a lot of people that are, you're responsible for. So I mean, it's a responsibility. It's something that if done correctly at an executive or leadership level, what you do with it defines who you are to some degree.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I've seen plenty of people start to make money in the business and, either gamble it away or whatever. Right. I think, if you're serious about what you're doing as an employer, number one priority is going to be your employees, right? Your customers got to be just as close, but right behind that. What's cost me relationships is that, right? So, let's go to Hawaii together, right? And all of a sudden something's going on in the business. You got to get home. And, unfortunately, women could feel second best there, even though that, you might love that person and they're not second best. It makes it difficult. And then what you had said, right, like the risk side for me, like I've made money and I've been broke, right, after making money. Thank God, by the way, because then when you actually really make real money, you realize, okay, what to do with it. But I've made money. I've been broke. I had no business having a family, and the risks that I was taking to try to get to the point where I'm at today.
So I love this idea of money lessons because everyone can learn something from it. So talk a little bit about, you said, I've been broke, I've made some money, and I learned a lot of things along the way. Can you touch on some of those things for everyone, including ourselves, just to understand, like, what are some of those either mistakes and what are some of the things that you would have done differently or that you've learned over the years?
Sure. I think that you look at money before you have it, and you think it's for things, right? And then you get it and you buy things, or you make terrible investments because every deal looks great to you, right? Like, I'm going to make another $1 million.
As an entrepreneur, you're always glass half full, right? Like, you look at every deal and you're like, I can make this work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. And then I think you realize later that money is security, right? And what you do with it, and how to make it grow. Right. Most people don't learn. We don't learn in high school. We don't learn in college what it is to make what money is and how to make it work and how to make it grow. Right. But I think that realizing the change for me was realizing that money isn't for things. Money's for security, and that if I want things, I've got to take the money that I have, put it to work, so that I don't spend that money, and the money that's working for me is what I can go by things with, right?
Right. So it's the difference between principal and interest, right? Like, people don't understand what your money is doing.
Absolutely.
Because also too, there's this idea of like, oh, I'm gonna cut out coffee, and that's gonna save me $4 a day, and that's gonna be the difference. It's like, no, just put your money to work and have the money you're making. Let's just call it $100. Have that money. Have it at $100. Make you $4, so you get a piece of coffee, right? Like, there's just this idea, and nobody's teaching this stuff. Nobody's talking about it until you actually have a couple of dollars in your pocket, where people, because you want to know why people are talking about it, because they want some of those dollars that are in your pocket. So now people are talking about it. So,
and I'll tell you, one of the most impactful books I've ever read in my life was Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Yeah,
that's what got me. And you and I, I own doors, right? And we talk about doors, we're talking about apartments or rental units, right? Could be this building that you own, but we're collecting rent every month, right? My principal in that building is going nowhere. As a matter of fact, it's growing.
Right.
And I'm still collecting those rent checks, which then I can go get things with if I want, or preferably put it to work more, right?
And when you did start to accumulate some money, did you start to look at the world differently from a time perspective? Because one of the things as I've gotten older that I didn't recognize when I was younger is money's nice, but time is really nice. And the people that I surround myself and the experiences 100%. And all those different things, my perspective changes so much. Because you're a little bit older, but as
very little, by the way,
a lot more successful, but a little bit older. But and so I'm just curious as to how your perspective has changed over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? Like, time is really, if I have the time, and I've told people, like, you don't know what I would pay for another hour in the day.
Yeah.
Right. And I think time is what well, I mean, you can use it, right? But you can't get any more.
It's undervalued.
100%. So I think that's probably the most undervalued commodity that we have that is limited, right? So what do you do with that time?
Yeah.
Right.
And who you spend it with.
And who you spend it with, right? And so I did spend a lot of that time working on the things that I have done and neglected things in my life, personal life, right? Wife, kids, those types of things, to get to where I'm at today. And you asked me earlier, like, could I see that changing? Yeah, I think so. I mean, at at the end of when I'm done once the merger happens and whatever time I spend working with True Leave and in the transition and for however much more time I have there to the point where I'm not creating value anymore. At that point, then I'm gonna slow down.
What do you want to do with
spend more time, right? Golfing with my friends, wake surfing, traveling, spending time with my family, my parents. I have 2 healthy parents that are both 78 years old, who I owe everything to. And I've neglected that relationship to some extent, right? I've moved around a lot. I've done a lot of things in order for me to be able to accomplish my goals. My dad plays golf 3 days a week still. I mean, the guy's in great shape. I want to be playing 3 days a week of golf with my father, right? I want to be spending time with my mother, believe it or not, making gnocchi in the kitchen, right? Sure. But brother, sister, right? The relationships that we have great love for each other, but at the end of the day, like I haven't had the ability to put in that time. So those are the things that I want to do, and take a step back, but I'll never be able to stop.
Walk me through a typical day when you were at, and maybe in the heart of your career, when you start, and then what you did throughout the day, so people can get an idea to what both the sacrifice means, the hours, and then what specifically as a senior exec, what are you doing? Because people see it's been sensationalized, entrepreneurship, right? But I think when you see like successful execs and entrepreneurs, there's still this question of like, okay, like what do they do when they wake up? When do they go to bed? And what are they doing throughout the day? Like they get all the credit, but what happens? Like what's the middle of the sandwich look like?
Sure, it's a grind,
Yeah.
Right. It's not glorious, and people think a lot of the times like you have a business and you make a bunch of money and you don't have to do anything, which I would argue that one of the reasons I'm where I'm at today in my life is because I'm not the smartest guy in the room, never have been, don't want to be, by the way. I'm a C student, right? But
you kind of look like a C student.
You're going to be hard-pressed to find people willing to outwork me.
Yeah.
Right. And so if we talk about that, I'm up every day by 4:35 in the morning. I'm in the gym at 6 a.m. I'm out of the gym at 7. I'm working between, if I'm in the car, I'm on the phone. I've evolved from being an executor. Okay. So that's, all day in the trenches, grinding, trying to, get whatever it is done so that we can make payroll next week, right? And back against the wall type of entrepreneur. I've come up that way, right? Nobody ever gave me money and said, hey, go build this business. I built them off cash flow.
Yep, that's awesome.
To where I've evolved today, I spend most of my time today on phone calls, either strategically discussing the business and where that business should go and what we should do as an organization, or I'm still working my way out because I've always been an executor and I've always been, I love being in the trenches with my guys. I want to be there, right? And they're like, hey, man, we got this, right? So I'm working on, and I have been working on myself for a long time to become much more now as a coach versus a dictator, or this is what needs to happen, and jumping in the trenches and doing it with them. So I would say a lot of my time is spent with my direct reports, working on their issues and problems that they may have, cross-functional issues that are happening in the organization. But it's legitimately, I would say, we're putting in anywhere between a 10 to a 15-hour day, and I'm working. I mean, you've been at my house on Sunday. I'm working 7 days a week, and that's there's nothing glorious about it.
Well, I want to take this opportunity because this is interesting, because I'm in a similar stage of trying to take a step back in the business and leave the executor and the doer part of it, and then empower a team to actually do it. Do you have any insight as to, because one of the things I struggle with, or used to struggle with, was you just answer the question, right? Like they come up with a problem, I'm like, all right, do this. Like I don't let them make these decisions. And then I've realized that you can hamstring people doing that. 100%. But are there other things, or that, or what are some, maybe some guidance as to someone who's trying to encourage leadership amongst a team of people? Because at the end of the day, the business can't be you. Right? When someone buys you, they're actually wanting you to, probably transition.
Kick rocks.
Well, I think, Casey, what I would tell you is our number one priority as a leader should be to leave the business in better leadership than what it is when we're here.
That's awesome.
Right?
Yeah, that's so true.
So how do you get to that point if you're going to do everything, right? So I have coaches, right? I have people that coach me. I've had 360s done on myself with my own people, right? To understand, what do I need to change, right? And then share that with them. And I tell them, nothing's off limits. I look at myself, Casey, and as somebody that is just another person at the company that has a role. And you may have a different role than I do, but it's just as important. And I always want my team to feel that way, and I want them to understand that they can always come to me and tell me, hey, Joe, stay out of my business. I've got this handled, right? And so allowing your team to do that, right, giving them the permission to say, hey, come to me and tell me, we've got this, stay out of my business, let us handle it. And I'm okay with that. And what I've learned is, and I'm still working on it, by the way, and I'll always be working on this, right? But what I've learned is that if we allow those folks to take that, generally they're going to find something better than we thought of, or they're going to make a mistake and learn from it, and they're not going to do it again, right? And those mistakes are important for their growth. They're important for the company's growth. So get a coach, somebody that can help you understand, how do I do this? But give your employees the authority to come to you and say, no, listen, we've got this, right? You've got to let them give you feedback, even when it's negative. What I've learned what I've been able to do, I'm probably most proud of for me over the last 2 or 3 years, is that I'm great now with taking constructive criticism about my management style and the things that I'm doing.
Is it because I love that, all of that, and thank you for that. Is there, we've talked about this several times on the show, the idea of confidence and building confidence, and how when you do get knocked down, how you create confidence. Is there a level of confidence that you've gotten to where now you're able to take some of that criticism, and where maybe in your younger days you're like, you want to fight back, you're like, wait a minute, no, this is why I did that. You're explaining yourself now as you're like, let me listen, let me think about that before I even respond. How did you get to that point?
I think, first of all, you're right? Like, how do you get to this point of, and I think some of it's confidence. I think a lot of it too is, what have you already experienced, right? So if I look back at experiences and say, okay, well, I never have a problem raising my hand and saying I'm wrong, right? And if I look back at some of my experiences and start to realize that I didn't maybe make the best decision, but if I would have allowed somebody else to be part of that decision, we might have made a better decision. And then building also that confidence, like you said, I'm very confident that if we make a mistake, that I have a great team around me that can fix that mistake.
Well, you've fostered an amazing culture, which is another thing that we consistently throughout everybody that's sit in this chair. Culture and confidence seem to be a consistent theme in winning. And what you've described, what you've reflected on these last couple minutes is exactly what you're stating. You've fostered the type of culture that wins, which means empower people, treat people respectfully, check your ego at the door. You're a team player. You have a role. Everybody has a role. Nobody's better than anyone else. And I think that's really fascinating. It's been great.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at yourself in the mirror and then you realize that everybody around you, no matter what their role is in the organization, you can learn from them. And then you start to take that approach and say, okay, I consciously told myself I want to be a better leader. So what am I going to do to be a better leader? Get a coach, read a lot of books, and allow my team to give me feedback so that I can be a better leader. And those are the three things I'd tell you that are really have gotten me to work on it. I'm not saying I'm great at it today, but we're working on it.
Yeah. What's something that people don't know about an executive, like the life of an executive? What's something, maybe if you peel the curtain, take the curtain back a bit, that people, maybe there's this idea of like, hey, every senior executive is probably this or that, or what? Like, give me some idea as to what like the reality is versus maybe, how they have these memes of like Instagram versus reality pictures. Like, what is it?
Yeah, like every day you come in and you get a hot washcloth that goes.
You have your own bathroom in the office. Yeah, you have your own bathroom. Yeah. Your assistant is a 24-year-old blonde in Arizona.
No.
Well, that might be true.
As a matter of fact, I still book my own flights. I still answer my own emails, right? Like, I think that probably one thing that most people don't know is that it's pretty lonely.
Right? So that is so true. And that's probably one of the reasons why you have a coach, right? Because you need somebody to talk to, and some of your friends, a lot of your family, they're just not in the same. They're going to have anything that's going to.
They're not living the experience.
Yeah. And when I say it's pretty lonely, like, as I have direct reports that are growing and they're advancing in the business, they start to realize it's just not about the fact, because I do have a lot of successful people around me. Very fortunate to have those people around me, people that I can call and say, hey, but it gets lonely in the company, okay? Because you can't have the conversation that you were having at the water cooler when you were, this employee. Now that you're this employee, right, you have to behave differently. You have to act differently. Not that you change who you are, but
people are watching.
Certainly have to modify. You're under a microscope.
Yeah. And so it's very important that you understand, that I think is a misconception is that, you're leading this company and everything's great and it's, all fun and games. It gets pretty lonely because you got a few people in the organization you can have some of those conversations with. And, that's just one example. And I think it's important what you said. People are watching. Yeah. Right. The other thing I had to learn, Casey, is if I'm walking down the hallway with a scowl on my face, that means Joe's pissed off, right? All I was doing was thinking about what needs to happen. I'm walking by people not realizing they're there, so now I'm mad, right? And so understanding that that's the other thing as an executive, we could say is somewhat lonely, is you have to be, you have to show up every day.
You're on.
Yeah.
Self-discovery is important, which I think what you're speaking to is when you say grab a coach, one of the things is, an unexamined life is a life not worth living, right? I mean, and in business, it's even more important to understand who you are and how you can amend yourself to be a better executive every day.
Yeah.
Well, so let's talk about this because the chief energy officer, right? Like you're being evaluated on how you look and how you dress, how you talk, what the scowl on your face when you're walking down the hall, and it can have nothing to do with what your actual energy is. So as you put this, this kind of mode of like, look, everything's positive, we're good to go. Like, how do you? When you get hit with a lawsuit, you get hit with a licensing infraction, you get hit with someone. There's an employee that's disgruntled. There's just all kinds of shit that happens, right? When you manage that many people. So what are the things that you can do to actually say, hey, I got to stay positive no matter what, because there's, 1,000 other people that are relying on me for that.
Sure. I don't know that I have a good answer for that, to be honest with you, Casey. I think, what I've learned is that everything isn't as big of a deal as it seems to be at the time, right? So, and that's to try to approach issues that we have as an organization. But I mean, I have so much work to do in getting better at that, right? I am unfortunately the type of person that sees everything that's wrong. And I don't do a great job of telling my team how great they have been and what they have done and the accomplishments that they've made, right? This is another thing that I continue to work on. And so I'm still working on it. I don't have a great answer for you. And there's times where I fail in that miserably.
Yeah,
right.
That's good insight into the thought process behind it, right? Like we're not perfect creatures, and I think it's one of the things is this self-awareness of yes, this is something that's important, but no, I'm not where I need or want to be, so I'm working on it. Like that's just the answer, right?
Like
that's
where I need to be. But I think that if you could take the approach to where, if I look at all the things that I thought were just terrible at the time, they generally turned out to be good, right after the fact. And so I look at the same things I'm talking about in my life. And so I kind of look at the same thing in business, right? When something bad happens, it really comes down to what are you going to do? How are you going to react, right? To make it not be so bad.
Well, and there's there's two different things. When something bad happens, I split it in, there's a visceral response, there's an emotional response, but then there's an intellectual response, and they may be completely opposite. They might be a completely different reaction. Emotionally, like, oh shit, I'm fucked. And yet when you start intellectualizing, you go, well, wait a second, actually, rationally, no, I'm not, and this is how I'm gonna make this win, right? I mean, do you see that as a distinguishing moment?
Yeah, I think so, and I think what the one part I've gotten good at is the emotional side of it. Right? It doesn't bother me anymore.
Is that the not get too high, not too low, but you stay the
doesn't
equilibrium?
Bother me anymore. Like, I know we're going to get through it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
but
we're not shutting the doors tomorrow because something bad happened.
But part of that is experience, right? Like you tell a 20-year-old who's in a startup that every single thing every day they're on this roller coaster, and you can even tell them like, hey, it's your equilibrium. It's not don't get too high, don't get too low, and they're like, okay, and then the next day they're doing the same exact.
It's funny. Your teammate Rashid Davis, who we had Rashid, who was a Chicago Bear, right? Yep. And it's funny. So the second game, so we made the Bears that team. The second game, he caught a winning touchdown against the Minnesota Vikings, right? And I was so pumped. I was a very young agent, and I called the GM, Jerry Angelo at the time, and I was like, Rashid, and he's like, when? He goes, I'm thinking new contract, you know? And he goes, hey, check this out, pal. The NFL, you know, you can't get too high on the W's and you can't get too low on the L's, because guess what? Next week, Rashid could get hurt. Rashid could get drop a pass. So he's like, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but check this out. In the league, and this is true of life, don't get too high and don't get too low. Try to stay even keel.
No, I would agree with that. That's funny. That's a great story.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
But yeah,
Really shut me up in a minute.
Yeah, but I think what, you know, if you look back on that, right, experience today, you're not, you
I
don't
would
have
know not to do that.
Well, you don't have that reaction anymore, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know.
Well, and I've had highs and lows. I mean, every athlete and every businessman. I think it's a similar thing.
Was there one that you remember, like one like where you got knocked down, where you're like fuck,
oof.
this is, or like one pivotal moment in your life, or that whether it was your life or business, where you're like that, the first thing that comes to your head, is there one of those moments in your life?
Yeah, there is. There is.
All right, now we'll dig in. I think we found the sweet spot.
Perfect. We finally cracked him. It took us a while, but we got him.
Yeah, no. But I'd prefer to have that conversation off camera.
Sure, no problem. We'll have it tonight.
We'll edit the details back into this video.
Absolutely. We'll get a hidden camera tonight. Anyways, Joe, thank you very, very much for taking the time to hang out with us. I really enjoy the conversation, and thank you for being here. And ladies and gentlemen, I just want to let you guys know that this is yet another amazing session of Fuck You Friday. And please, continue to send us DMs, like us, subscribe, do whatever you need to do. We're on every fucking platform out there, Joe, just so you know, every platform. And
no,
so
I have no social media, by the way.
I know. You're by design. Anyways, thank you very, very much. And this wraps up yet another session of Fuck You Friday.
Thanks, Joe. It was great to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe.
Awesome.